Hey everyone, this is Brooks Popwell from Pure Life Ministries. You're about to hear part of our bi-weekly podcast, Purity for Life. Hope you enjoy. In this segment, Pastor Steve Gallagher talks about how people dealing with sexual sin can also sometimes face the additional challenge of a tendency to be self-righteous. If you'd like to read the article this interview is based on, you can go to purelifeministries.org/podcast, where you'll find a link to the article under episode number 330. Pastor Steve, I was fascinated by this article you wrote entitled, What Sex Addicts and Pharisees Have in Common. These are groups I don't often think about in the same sentence, but you gave a few reasons why they're similar. And before we talk about this idea more, in the opening, you said something that really caught my attention. It was about people like me that come from a church background, but you said if you talked to them in the church while they were struggling with sexual sin and you said, turn to Christ as the answer, they'd probably only interpret that as an invitation to pursue modern formalism versus pursuing a vibrant life in God. Talk to me about the difference between these two things, formal religion and what you're calling a life in God. How do we get confused about the difference between these two?
The predominant characteristic of Pharisees was that they were focused on outward things rather than the inward life. Jesus constantly focused on the heart. What's going on in a person's heart? What's the interchange between that person's inward life and God? God is a spirit being. He's a person. He's not a set of rules and regulations. Yes, there is the law that we must keep in regards to and in relation to that relationship we have with the Lord. But rules and regulations are not what Christianity are about. This Christian thing is all about our relationship with God. And when you are walking with the Lord, you are you're focused on Him. You're in constant communion with Him. He's real to you. That's so different than what I would say modern Phariseeism would be, which is just the American church thing of going to church, keeping some basic rules. We don't do this. We don't do that. We don't say those things. We're against these things. And, just kind of adapting yourself to a church culture, that is completely different than really walking with God and having a vibrant relationship with Him.
I'm going to insert something here. I was just reading this morning one of those verses where Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, and it's a common verse. I guess people probably know it. Can you just explain it? Because evidently Jesus thought this was what he should say to them to break them out of their delusion. He said, God desires mercy and not sacrifice. What was he getting at?
Well, another one of the predominant characteristics of a Pharisee is that a Pharisee has a critical, judging spirit. And what they do is they have their outward things they do, their little rules they keep. And when other people don't keep those rules, their rules, then they judge them and they look down on them and they're critical of them. And they have, Jesus said, you weigh people down. And that's what he was talking about. You weigh them down with burdens and that are too cumbersome, too heavy to bear. And that's not what Christianity's about. Christianity should be full of joy, and there should be life and liberty in it. But that's what the Pharisees did back then in their own way, and that's what Pharisees do today, is when they're focused on certain outward laws and rules to keep, then they pick other people apart who don't keep those particular things that they deem as so important.
Well, coming back now to the idea of sexual addicts being Pharisees, it's kind of a paradox in my mind. But you say one reason for that is that they're deceived because they're living a double life where they're pretending everything's okay and keeping sexual sin in secret. Now, I know when I came to Pure Life a few years ago, that fit me because I thought I'm a pretty good Christian, but I just have this small problem on the side. So let's pretend, I don't think I talked to you directly in that time when I was there, but let's pretend I was talking to you at that point. What would you have said to me?
Well, I know that I would have focused on the enormity of sin, the blackness of it, the evil nature of sin, and especially sexual sin, especially pornography, the pornography industry, all of it. It's black with Satan's touch. And I probably would have came at it from that standpoint. So when you think about a Pharisee and you think about a sexual addict, let's just look at these two people side by side. A Pharisee is walking in the flesh. He's not walking in the Spirit. And so everything he's doing is coming from a carnal mindset. Jesus told the Pharisees that they are the blind leading the blind. And, they were blinded by their own self-righteousness. And that's exactly really what you're talking about. I'm a pretty good guy. That's self-righteousness. That's different than the righteousness of God. A sex addict is deceived because sin always deceives. Every time a person sins, whatever the kind of sin it is, every time a person sins, it works deception into his soul, and it makes him increasingly more blind to the reality of his spiritual condition. So you have two different kinds of people that you would think have nothing in common, but what they have in common is that they're walking in the flesh and they're deceived by their own lifestyles, and they are separating themselves from God.
Wow. Well, I want to mention one more common factor that you touched on, and that was what you called powerless religion. I know so many people today in the church do feel powerless because they're trapped in sexual sin, and they know that, whether they're maybe open about it with others. How does someone get out of this kind of religion if they feel like Christianity, the way they've known it in their own lives, has not had any power to deliver them from their addiction?
Well, let me take you to something that Paul said. Remember, Paul had once been Saul the Pharisee. And he knew what it meant to be a Pharisee because he was a Pharisee of Pharisees, his words. And he eventually came to the place in his life where the Lord was able to show him that in his weakness, God's power would be manifested. And that was completely the opposite of what Saul the Pharisee had lived in. He was strong in himself, in his ability to keep the law, and his ability to do all these outward things, and his ability to look righteous to other people. He was strong that way, and God had to break him and break him and break him and get him to the place of such weakness as a person that God's power could come through his life. That's the difference between powerful Christianity and powerless. And so, okay, a guy in sexual sin, it's the same kind of thing. He's strong in his self. His self-life, his carnal nature is strong and vibrant and in control. And that's got to be broken. And so it's through the process of God's breaking us down and weakening us that his power can come in and set us free from the hold of any kind of sin.
Thanks for listening. You can find Purity for Life on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Or just go to our website, purelifeministries.org/podcast.